The sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth of Pecos, Texas, as Naomi Porter's anguished screams pierced the afternoon stillness. "Samuel! Samuel! Where are you?" Her voice cracked with desperation as she stumbled through the dusty main street, her once pristine blue dress now caked with the rusty soil of the unforgiving desert. It was June 1878, and her 6-year-old boy had been missing since morning. Naomi had only turned away for a moment at the general store. One minute Samuel was examining a wooden toy horse, and the next he had vanished like morning dew in the Texas heat. Hours of searching with neighbors had yielded nothing but exhaustion and mounting fear. "Please," she begged, grabbing the arm of yet another passerby. "Have you seen my boy? Dark hair, blue eyes, wearing a white shirt and brown trousers." The stranger shook his head apologetically before continuing on his way. Naomi felt her legs weaken beneath her. 3 hours had passed since Samuel disappeared, and with each passing minute, the possibility of finding him diminished. The desert surrounding Pecos was vast and unforgiving, a labyrinth of cacti, rattlesnakes, and rocky terrain that could claim the life of a grown man, let alone a small boy. "Miss Porter," Sheriff Collins approached, his weathered face grim beneath his gray mustache. "We've organized a search party, but I've got to be honest with you, if your boy wandered into the desert, we're racing against time." "He's alive?" Naomi insisted, her voice trembling with conviction and fear. "He has to be." The sheriff nodded sympathetically. "We'll do everything we can, but you should prepare yourself. The desert doesn't show mercy, even to children. Neither does a mother's determination," she replied, squaring her shoulders despite the tears streaming down her face. As the sheriff walked away to coordinate the search parties, Naomi felt someone watching her. She turned to find a tall man observing from the shade of the saloon porch. Unlike the other townsfolk who averted their eyes from her suffering, he met her gaze directly. There was something in his eyes, not pity, but understanding. He pushed himself away from the wooden column he'd been leaning against and approached her with purposeful strides. His appearance marked him as someone who lived by his own rules: dusty black hat pulled low over piercing blue eyes, worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and twin revolvers strapped to his hips. The spurs on his boots clinked softly as he walked. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Name's Seth Ironwood. Heard you've lost your boy." "Samuel," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's only 6. Seth nodded, studying the ground around them. "The search parties are heading east and north. Makes sense, that's where most folks would wander. But children don't think like adults." "What do you mean?" Naomi asked, suddenly alert to the calm confidence in his voice. "I've tracked men and beasts across territories wilder than this," Seth explained. "A child won't necessarily go where it makes sense. They follow curiosity or fear. Sometimes they just wander, chasing a lizard or a butterfly." Hope flickered in Naomi's chest. "Do you think you could find him?" Seth's eyes scanned the vast expanse of desert beyond the town limits. The afternoon sun was already beginning its descent, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. In a few hours, the desert would plunge into darkness, and the temperature would drop drastically. If the boy was out there, he wouldn't survive the night without shelter. "I can't make promises I'm not certain I can keep," Seth said finally, his voice low and serious. "But I'll find your boy or I'll die trying." The words were spoken without dramatic flair, delivered as a simple statement of fact, yet they hit Naomi with unexpected force. This stranger was offering what no one else had: absolute commitment to finding Samuel, regardless of the cost. "Why would you do this?" Naomi asked, searching his face for ulterior motives. Seth's expression remained unchanged. "Because I know what it's like to be lost in that desert, madam. and I know what it's like to wait for someone who never returns." Before Naomi could respond, Seth continued, "I need something with your boy's scent, a piece of clothing he wore recently." "I have his nightshirt at home," Naomi said. "He slept in it last night." "That'll work. Bring it to the edge of town in 10 minutes. I'll gather my supplies and meet you there." As Seth walked away toward the livery stable, Sheriff Collins approached Naomi again. "I'd be careful about that one, Miss Porter. Seth Ironwood has a reputation. Former Army scout turned bounty hunter after the war. Some say he's killed more men than the fever." "Right now, Sheriff, I need someone who can find my son," Naomi replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "And that man just offered to do what your search parties haven't managed." The sheriff sighed. "I understand your desperation, but that man follows his own code. There's talk he went native for a time, living with the Comanches. Not someone I'd trust with my son's life." Naomi interrupted. "I've entrusted that to the desert already, Sheriff. I'll take my chances with Mr. Ironwood." 10 minutes later, Naomi stood at the eastern edge of town with Samuel's nightshirt clutched in her hands. The faint scent of soap and her son's hair still clung to the fabric, and holding it brought a fresh wave of fear and longing. What if she never saw him again? What if the sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts? Seth approached on a powerful buckskin stallion, leading a second horse, a dappled gray mare. His saddle was packed with supplies: water canteens, rope, a rifle in its scabbard, and what appeared to be tracking equipment. "The mare's for you," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "For me?" Naomi repeated in surprise. "I thought you would go alone." "A mother has the right to search for her child," Seth replied simply. "Besides, you know him best. You might notice things I'd miss. But the desert is dangerous, yes. But I know it well enough for both of us." Seth held out his hand for the nightshirt. "May I?" Naomi handed it over, watching as Seth held the garment to his face and inhaled deeply. Then he knelt and presented it to his horse, letting the animal familiarize itself with Samuel's scent. "Horses have better noses than people," Seth explained, seeing her questioning look. "Thunder here has helped me track fugitives across 3 territories." Seth rolled up the nightshirt and secured it in his saddlebag. Then he offered Naomi his hand. "Can you ride, Miss Porter?" "I grew up on a farm in Missouri before coming west," Naomi answered, taking his hand and mounting the mare with practiced ease. "Riding is about the only thing I'm confident about right now." Seth nodded with approval. "Good. We'll head southwest first. There's a series of rock formations that might attract a curious boy. If we don't find sign of him there, we'll circle back toward Devil's Creek." Devil's Creek. Naomi's heart sank at the ominous name. "Don't worry about the name. It's just a seasonal wash with interesting rocks. Children like shiny things, and after last month's rain, there might be pools still holding water and critters." As they rode out of town, the afternoon sun at their backs, Naomi felt a mixture of hope and terror. The desert stretched before them, beautiful and deadly in its vastness. Somewhere out there was her son, afraid, alone, possibly injured. The thought made her dig her heels into the mare's flanks, urging the horse to match Seth's pace. "Not too fast," Seth cautioned. "We need to watch the ground, look for signs. A child Samuel's size won't leave deep tracks, but he'll disturb the surface soil, maybe break small branches or disturb rocks." For the next hour, they rode in silence, Seth occasionally dismounting to examine the ground or a disturbed patch of vegetation. The sun continued its descent, and Naomi felt panic rising with each passing minute. "What if we don't find him before dark?" she finally asked, voicing her deepest fear. Seth glanced at her, his expression calm but concerned. "The desert gets cold at night, but a healthy child can survive one night if he finds shelter. And if he doesn't? Let's cross that bridge when we come to it, Seth replied. For now, we keep looking. They continued their search as the rock formation Seth had mentioned came into view, towering spires of red sandstone shaped by wind and time into fantastic shapes. Any other day, Naomi would have marveled at their beauty. Today, she saw only potential dangers: steep drops, unstable surfaces, hiding places for rattlesnakes and scorpions. Seth suddenly raised his hand, signaling her to stop. He dismounted and crouched, examining something on the ground. Naomi's heart leaped as he picked up a small object. Is that? Seth stood and showed her a wooden button. This look familiar? Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Yes, it's from Samuel's shirt. I sewed it on myself last week after the original broke. A hint of a smile touched Seth's lips. Good. Now we have a direction. He remounted his horse. The tracks head toward those formations. He's been gone about 4 hours now, and judging by these prints, he's moving slowly but steadily. For the first time since Samuel's disappearance, Naomi felt genuine hope. He's alive, she whispered. And he's smart enough to keep moving towards something interesting rather than wandering aimlessly, Seth added. That improves his chances considerably. They rode toward the rock formations, following the subtle signs that Seth somehow managed to discern from what looked like undisturbed earth to Naomi's untrained eye. As they approached the towering sandstone structures, Seth dismounted again and examined the ground more carefully. He stopped here, Seth announced, pointing to a small depression in the sand. Sat down, probably rested. Then he moved forward slowly, studying the ground. He went this way, toward that narrow passage between the rocks. The passage Seth indicated was barely wide enough for an adult to navigate. The walls rose 30 feet on either side, creating a natural corridor through the stone. I'll go first, Seth said, handing Naomi his horse's reins. If I call, bring the horses around to the other side. There's likely a way around these formations. Naomi nodded, watching anxiously as Seth squeezed through the narrow opening. She held her breath, straining to hear any sound from within the stone corridor. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, Seth's voice echoed back to her. Naomi, I found something. Her heart pounding, Naomi secured the horses and rushed to the passage entrance. Samuel? She called out hopefully. Not him, but evidence he was here, Seth's voice replied. Can you make it through? The passage was tight, but Naomi managed to squeeze through, emerging on the other side to find a small, sheltered area enclosed by the towering rocks. Seth was kneeling, examining the ground. Look, he said, pointing to a small pile of colorful stones arranged in a deliberate pattern. Children collect things. Samuel stopped here long enough to play with these rocks. Naomi knelt beside Seth, touching the small arrangement of stones. He loves collecting pretty stones, she confirmed, tears welling in her eyes. This is definitely Samuel's work. He always arranges them by color like this. Seth nodded, his expression softening. This is good news. He wasn't panicking when he was here. He felt safe enough to stop and play. But where did he go next? Naomi asked, looking around the enclosed space. There seemed to be no way out except the passage they had entered through. Seth stood and examined the rock walls carefully. There, he said finally, pointing to another, even narrower opening. Children can fit through spaces adults can't even consider. I think he went through there. But we can't follow, Naomi realized, despair threatening to overwhelm her again. We'll find another way, Seth assured her. Come on, back to the horses. We'll circle around. As they returned to their mounts, the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in fiery red and deep purple. The beautiful sight only intensified Naomi's fear. "We're losing daylight," she said, unable to keep the panic from her voice. Seth nodded grimly. "We have maybe an hour of good light left. After that, we'll need to make a decision." "What decision?" Naomi demanded, though she feared she already knew the answer. "Whether to continue searching in the dark, which is dangerous and might cause us to miss signs, or to make camp and resume at first light." "I won't stop searching," Naomi declared firmly. "Not while my son is out there alone." Seth studied her face for a moment. "I understand, but consider this: exhausting ourselves won't help Samuel. If we need to track him tomorrow, we'll need our strength and clear heads." Naomi wanted to argue, but the logic of his words was undeniable. Still, the thought of her son spending the night alone in the desert was unbearable. They circled the rock formations, searching for signs of Samuel's passage. The fading light made tracking increasingly difficult, but Seth's experienced eyes continued to find subtle indications: a disturbed rock here, a partial footprint there. The trail led them toward a shallow valley where desert willows grew in surprising abundance. "Water," Seth explained, noting Naomi's questioning look. "There's water somewhere nearby, probably underground. The plants tap into it." As if confirming his words, they crested a small rise and saw a sight that made Naomi gasp: a small pool of water nestled among the rocks, surrounded by desert vegetation. In the fading light, it looked almost magical, a secret oasis hidden in the harsh landscape. "Samuel would have been drawn to this," Seth said. "Children instinctively seek water." They approached the pool cautiously. The sand around it bore numerous animal tracks: coyotes, rabbits, birds, all coming to drink. But as they searched the area, they found no sign of Samuel. The last rays of sunlight disappeared, plunging the desert into deepening twilight. Seth lit a small lantern he'd brought in his pack, but its light seemed feeble against the growing darkness. "We need to make a decision," he said gently. Naomi stared out at the darkening desert, tears streaming down her face. Every instinct screamed at her to continue searching, but she knew Seth was right. In the darkness, they were as likely to ride past Samuel as they were to find him. "If we stay here," Seth continued, "we'll be near water. If Samuel is still wandering, he might be drawn to our fire, and we'll be rested to continue the search at first light." "What if he's injured?" Naomi whispered. "What if he needs help now?" Seth laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Naomi, I promise you at first light, we will find your son. But right now, the best thing we can do for him is to be smart about this." The use of her first name, spoken with such conviction, somehow penetrated her panic. Naomi took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, we'll make camp." Seth efficiently set up a small camp, building a fire that would be visible from a distance. He produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, offering some to Naomi, who couldn't bring herself to eat. Instead, she sat staring into the flames, imagining Samuel cold and afraid in the darkness. "Tell me about your boy," Seth said, settling beside her. Naomi looked up in surprise. "What? Samuel? Tell me about him. What kind of child is he? What does he like? The more I know about him, the better I can track him." Naomi hesitated, then found herself wanting to talk about her son. "He's curious, always asking questions, wanting to know how things work. He collects things: stones, feathers, interesting sticks. He's cautious with strangers but friendly once he knows you." "Smart boy," Seth commented. "Cautious is good out here. What brought you to Pecos?" "You mentioned Missouri before. My husband died 3 years ago," Naomi explained. "Influenza. There was nothing left for us in Missouri after that. Just too many memories. My sister married a man who moved to Pecos to open a dress shop. She wrote about the opportunities here, said I could help in the shop while Samuel attended school. Seth nodded. And did it work out that way? Mostly. The shop does well enough. Samuel likes school. Naomi paused, looking into the fire. But it's been hard, raising him alone. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by him. The fact that you're out here, ready to search all night for him, suggests you're doing just fine, Seth said quietly. Naomi studied him in the firelight. The flames cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the hard angles but also revealing something softer in his eyes than she'd noticed before. What about you? She asked. You mentioned knowing what it's like to wait for someone who never returns. Seth was silent for so long Naomi thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. My wife and daughter, 7 years ago. We had a small ranch outside of Santa Fe. I was away scouting for the army. There was a raid, not Indians, as everyone assumed, but white men disguised as Apache. By the time I returned, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. I tracked them. Took me 2 years, but I found every last one. The implication was clear. Naomi should have been frightened by the cold certainty in his voice, but instead, she found herself understanding his need for justice or vengeance. And since then? She asked gently. Seth shrugged. I drift. Track people, animals, whatever needs finding. It's what I'm good at. Is that why you offered to help find Samuel? Because you couldn't find your daughter in time? Seth looked at her sharply. Then his expression softened. Maybe. Or maybe I just don't like the idea of a child alone in the desert. They fell into silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the vast stillness of the night. Despite her worry for Samuel, Naomi found herself dozing, exhaustion finally claiming her. She wasn't sure how long she'd been asleep when Seth's voice jerked her awake. Did you hear that? Naomi sat up straight, instantly alert. Hear what? Seth held up his hand, signaling for silence. They both listened intently. For a moment, there was nothing but the night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of the wind through the sparse vegetation. Then she heard it faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A child's voice calling out, Mama? Is somebody there? Samuel! Naomi leaped to her feet, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Samuel, we're here. Follow my voice, baby. Seth quickly stoked the fire, making it burn brighter. Then he grabbed his lantern and moved away from the camp, holding it high. This way, Samuel, he called. Follow the light. They waited, straining to hear any response. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing. Then they heard it again, closer this time. Mama? I'm scared. Keep talking, Samuel. Naomi called, her voice breaking with emotion. Keep talking so we can find you. Seth moved methodically, sweeping the lantern in wide arcs to make its light visible from all directions. Smart boy, he murmured to Naomi. He stayed put during the night. That's why we couldn't find his trail, he wasn't moving. They continued calling out, guiding Samuel with their voices. Finally, from behind a large rock formation about 50 yards from their camp, a small figure emerged, stumbling toward the light. Naomi ran, her feet barely touching the ground. In moments, she had Samuel in her arms, clutching him so tightly he squirmed in protest. Mama, you're squeezing too hard, he complained, but his small arms wrapped around her neck just as fiercely. Naomi laughed through her tears, loosening her grip slightly but unwilling to let go completely. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered, pressing kisses to his dusty hair. Are you hurt? Are you all right? Samuel nodded against her shoulder. I'm thirsty and hungry, and my feet hurt from walking. Seth approached slowly, giving mother and son their moment. When Samuel noticed him, he pulled back slightly in Naomi's arms, regarding the stranger with cautious curiosity. "Samuel, this is Mr. Ironwood," Naomi explained, wiping tears from her cheeks. "He helped me find you." Seth crouched down to Samuel's level, his expression gentler than Naomi had seen it. "You did well to survive out here, Samuel. That takes a brave boy." Samuel straightened a little at the praise. "I got lost following a horned lizard. Then I couldn't find my way back to town." "Smart of you to call out when you heard us," Seth said. "Some folks panic and run the wrong way. You kept your head." Samuel looked pleased at the compliment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small collection of stones. "Look what I found, Mama. This one shines in the dark." Sure enough, one of the stones had a faint phosphorescent glow. Seth smiled. "That's a special kind of rock. Not many people ever find those." They walked back to the campfire, Samuel between them, chattering about his adventure as though it had been a grand exploration rather than a terrifying ordeal. Naomi couldn't stop touching him, reassuring herself that he was really there, safe and whole. At camp, Seth gave Samuel water and some jerky, which the boy devoured hungrily. As Samuel ate, Seth examined him carefully, checking for injuries. Besides some scratches, blisters on his feet, and mild dehydration, Samuel appeared remarkably unharmed. "We'll stay here tonight," Seth decided. "It's too dangerous to travel back in the dark. We'll return to Pecos at first light." Naomi nodded in agreement, too relieved to have Samuel back to argue. She helped her son wash his face and hands with some of their precious water, then wrapped him in her shawl and held him close as he quickly fell asleep, exhausted from his ordeal. With Samuel sleeping soundly in her arms, Naomi looked across the fire at Seth. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Seth shook his head. "No need for thanks. I'm just glad the boy's safe." "You kept your promise," Naomi persisted. "You said you'd find him or die trying, and you found him." "To be fair, he found us," Seth replied with a small smile. "Smart kid you've got there." "Yes, he is." Naomi stroked Samuel's hair as he slept. "What will you do now, after you take us back to Pecos?" Seth poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks flying upward into the night sky. "Haven't decided yet. There's always someone needing something found." Naomi hesitated, then gathered her courage. "You could stay. In Pecos, I mean. The town could use someone with your skills." Seth looked at her thoughtfully. "And what would a dress shop assistant want with a worn-out tracker?" "Maybe she'd like to get to know the man who saved her son," Naomi replied, holding his gaze. "Maybe there's more to both of them than first appears." A smile tugged at the corner of Seth's mouth, a real smile this time, not the guarded half-smile she'd seen before. "Maybe there is at that." They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, comfortable, filled with possibility. As Samuel slept peacefully in her arms and the stars wheeled overhead, Naomi found herself thinking that perhaps losing her way had led her exactly where she needed to be. Morning broke with the soft golden light characteristic of the desert dawn. Naomi woke to find Seth already up, preparing a small breakfast of coffee and the last of his provisions. Samuel was awake too, sitting beside Seth and listening with rapt attention as the man pointed out animal tracks around their campsite. "This one's a kit fox," Seth was explaining. "See how small and neat the prints are? And these over here belong to a jackrabbit." Samuel nodded seriously, absorbing every word. When he noticed Naomi watching, he grinned. "Mr. Ironwood says I could be a tracker someday if I learned to read the signs." "Is that so?" Naomi asked, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. She caught Seth's eye over Samuel's head. "Sounds like you'd need a good teacher." Seth held her gaze for a moment before turning back to Samuel. First lesson of tracking: always make sure your mama knows where you're going before you set out. Samuel looked appropriately chastened. I'm sorry I scared you, Mama. Naomi hugged him close. Just don't ever wander off like that again. I couldn't bear to lose you. After a quick breakfast, they broke camp and prepared to return to Pecos. The journey back was vastly different from their tense search of the day before. Samuel rode with Seth, peppering him with questions about the desert, tracking, and Seth's adventures. Seth answered patiently, occasionally glancing at Naomi with an expression that made her heart beat a little faster each time. They crested the final ridge overlooking Pecos around mid-morning. The small town looked unexpectedly welcoming after their night in the desert. As they approached, they saw a search party preparing to ride out Sheriff Collins, organizing men with water, supplies, and weapons. When the sheriff spotted them, his face registered shock, then relief. He rode out to meet them, his expression incredulous. You found him. By God. You actually found him. Mr. Ironwood found me, Samuel corrected proudly. He's the best tracker in all of Texas. Sheriff Collins raised an eyebrow at Seth. Is that so? Well, I reckon we owe you our thanks, Ironwood. Miss Porter's boy means a lot to this town. Seth nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. As they rode into Pecos, word spread quickly. People emerged from shops and houses, calling out greetings and expressions of relief. By the time they reached the main street, a small crowd had gathered. Naomi's sister, Eleanor, pushed through the throng, tears streaming down her face. Samuel! Oh, thank God! She helped the boy down from Seth's horse and embraced him tightly, then reached for Naomi. I was so worried about both of you. As Eleanor fussed over Samuel, checking him for injuries and promising him his favorite pie, Naomi turned to Seth, who remained mounted, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Will you come in? She asked. Eleanor makes the best apple pie in the territory, and I know Samuel would love to introduce you to his aunt. Seth hesitated, glancing down the street toward the livery stable. I should see to the horses, get my gear sorted. Naomi felt her heart sink. He was preparing to leave, she realized. To drift away as he had for the past 7 years, moving from place to place with nothing to hold him anywhere. At least come for dinner, she pressed. Tonight. To properly thank you. Seth studied her face, something flickering in his blue eyes. Is that what it would be? A thank you dinner? Naomi summoned her courage again. It could be a beginning if you wanted it to be. For a long moment Seth was silent. Then, slowly, he dismounted and took off his hat. I'd like that, Miss Porter. Naomi, she corrected softly. Naomi, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. I'd like that very much. As the weeks passed, Seth became a regular visitor at the Porter home. At first, his visits were ostensibly to check on Samuel's recovery and to teach the boy about the desert's dangers and wonders. But increasingly, he lingered after Samuel went to bed, sitting with Naomi on the small porch, talking long into the evening. He told her about his life before tragedy struck his childhood in Tennessee. His years as an Army scout, the small ranch he'd built with his own hands for his first wife. In turn, she shared her own story, her dreams of adventure that had led her to marry a Missouri farmer, her grief at his passing, her hopes for Samuel's future. The townspeople noticed, of course. Seth Ironwood's presence in Pecos had initially caused whispers and suspicion. His reputation preceded him, the silent tracker, the man who had hunted down his family's killers with ruthless efficiency. But as weeks turned to months, the whispers changed. The frightening bounty hunter became the man who found young Samuel Porter. The dangerous drifter became the steady figure teaching the local boys how to read tracks and survive in the harsh environment. By the time autumn arrived, Bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, Seth had established himself in Pecos. He'd taken a job as a scout for the stagecoach line, guiding travelers safely through the territory. The position allowed him to use his skills while providing the stability he'd lacked for years. One evening in October, as crimson sunset painted the desert in fiery hues, Seth and Naomi sat on her porch, watching Samuel play with the neighborhood children in the street. "He's recovered completely," Seth observed. "You'd never know he was lost in the desert just months ago." "Children are resilient," Naomi replied. "But he still talks about your rescue constantly. You're his hero, you know?" Seth smiled slightly. "He's a good boy. You've done well with him, especially on your own." "Not entirely on my own," Naomi said, glancing at him. "Not anymore." Seth turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Naomi, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Something important." Her heart fluttered. "Yes. I've been thinking about putting down roots again. Permanently." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded deed. "There's a small piece of land just outside town, with a decent house already built. It needs work, but it's solid. Good water supply, enough land for horses, maybe some cattle eventually." Naomi took the deed, scanning it quickly. "You bought this?" "Yesterday," Seth confirmed. "But a house needs a family to make it a home." He took her hand in his. "I'm not good with words, Naomi. I've spent too many years alone for that. But I know what I feel when I'm with you and Samuel. I know that for the first time since I lost everything, I can see a future again." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes. "Seth, I'm asking if you and Samuel would consider making that future with me," he continued, his voice rougher with emotion. "If you would let me try to be a father to your son and a husband to you." Naomi didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "Yes to all of it." The relief and joy that transformed Seth's usually guarded face made Naomi's heart swell. He leaned forward and kissed her gently, a promise sealed under the vast Texas sky. They were married 2 weeks later in Pecos's small church, with Samuel proudly serving as best man. The townspeople who had once whispered about the dangerous bounty hunter now celebrated the union, filling the church and presenting the couple with gifts for their new home. As winter yielded to spring, and spring to summer, the Ironwood Ranch began to take shape. Seth and Naomi worked side by side, repairing the house, building corrals for horses, planting a garden. Samuel thrived under Seth's guidance, learning not only tracking and survival skills, but also the value of patience, persistence, and integrity. On the first anniversary of Samuel's rescue and their meeting, Seth and Naomi sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert gold and crimson. Samuel was inside, proudly showing his collection of interesting stones to Eleanor, who was visiting for dinner. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Naomi asked, leaning against Seth's shoulder. "If Samuel hadn't gotten lost that day." Seth's arm tightened around her. "I try not to dwell on what-ifs. But I do know this: sometimes what looks like your worst day turns out to be the beginning of your best life." Naomi smiled, placing her hand over his. "Who would have thought that losing my way would lead me home?" Seth kissed her temple gently. "I promised I'd find your boy or die trying. I never expected to find my heart in the process." As twilight deepened into night, stars appeared one by one in the vast Texas sky. Inside, Samuel's laughter mingled with Eleanor's voice. On the porch, Naomi and Seth sat together, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most precious things are found only after being lost. In the years that followed, the Ironwood Ranch prospered. Seth's knowledge of the territory made him an invaluable guide for travelers and settlers. Naomi's dress shop in town expanded to include practical but beautiful clothing designed specifically for frontier women. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his mother's compassion with Seth's resourcefulness. 2 years after their marriage, Naomi gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl named James and Sarah. The family that had begun with a desperate search in the desert was now complete, bound together not just by blood, but by the choice to face life's challenges together, to find each other again and again through whatever trials came their way. And on summer nights, when the desert cooled and the stars emerged, Seth would tell their children the story of how he had once promised to find a lost boy or die trying, and in doing so, had found his way home at last.